Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholes. Today's German folktale is... it's a really interesting tale. It seems like it might be a ghost tale, but really it's a bit of history. It's a plague tale, talking about, how the plague hit Cologne around 1400, 1357 to be exact. And the story is also a tale of love. And it's one of my favorites. Certainly one of my favorites from Folklore and Legends, German. This is The Grey Mare in the Garret. In the portal of the Church of the Apostles near the New Market in Cologne hung a picture, the portraits of a certain Frau Richmondis von Adux and her 2 children, of whom the following singular story is related. The picture was covered with a curtain, which she worked with her own hands. Her husband, Richmuth von Adux, was in the year of grace 1400 a rich burgomaster of Cologne, and lived at the sign of the Parquet in the Newmarkt. In that year, a fearful plague desolated all quarters of the city. She fell sick of the pest and, to all appearance, died. After the usual period had elapsed, she was buried in the vaults of the Apostles' Church. She was buried, as was the custom then, with her jeweled rings on her fingers, and most of her rich ornaments on her person. These tempted the cupidity of the sexton of the church. He argued with himself that they were no use to the corpse, and he determined to possess them. Accordingly, he proceeded in the dead of night to the vault where she lay interred and commenced the work of sacrilegious spoliation. He first unscrewed the coffin lid. He then removed it altogether and proceeded to tear away the shroud which interposed between him and his prey. But what was his horror to perceive the corpse clasp her hands slowly together, then rise, and finally sit erect in the coffin. He was rooted to the earth. The corpse made as though it would step from its narrow bed, and the sexton fled, shrieking, through the vaults. The corpse followed, its long white shroud floating like a meteor in the dim light of the lamp which in his haste he had forgotten. It was not until he reached his own door that he had sufficient courage to look behind him, and then, when he perceived no trace of his pursuer, the excitement which had sustained him so far subsided, and he sank senseless to the earth. In the meantime, Richmuth von Adux, who had slept scarcely a moment since the death of his dear wife, was surprised by the voice of his old manservant, who rapped loudly at his chamber door, and told him to awake and come forth, for his mistress had arisen from the dead, and was then at the gate of the courtyard. "Bah!" said he, rather pettishly. "Go thy ways, Hans, you dream, or are mad or drunk. What you see is quite impossible. I should as soon believe my old grey mare had got into the garret as that my wife was at the courtyard gate." Trot, 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 suddenly resounded high over his head. "What is that?" he asked of his servant. "I know not," replied the man. "And it be not your old grey mare in the garret." They descended in haste to the courtyard and looked up to the window of the attic. Lo, and behold, there was indeed the grey mare, with her head poked out of the window, gazing down with her great eyes on her master and his man, and seeming to enjoy very much her exalted station, and their surprise at it. Knock, 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 went the rapper of the street gate. "It is my wife! It is my mistress!" exclaimed master and man in the same breath. The door was quickly unfastened, and there truly stood the mistress of the mansion, enveloped in her shroud. "Are you alive or dead?" exclaimed the astonished husband.
"Alive, my dear, but very cold,"
she murmured faintly, her teeth chattering the while as those of one in a fever chill.
"Help me to my chamber."
He caught her in his arms and covered her with kisses. Then he bore her to her chamber and called up the whole house to welcome and assist her. She suffered a little from fatigue and fright, but in a few days she was very much recovered. The thing became the talk of the town, and hundreds flocked daily to see not alone the lady that was rescued from the grave in so remarkable a manner, but also to see the Grey Mare, which had so strangely contrived to get into the garret. The excellent lady lived long and happily with her husband, and at her death was laid once more in her old resting place. The Grey Mare, after resting in the garret 3 days, was got down by means of scaffolding, safe and sound. She survived her mistress for some time, and was a general favorite in the city, and when she died, her skin was stuffed and placed in the arsenal as a curiosity. The sexton went mad with the fright he had sustained, and in a short time entered that bourne which he had so unintentionally recovered the burgomaster's wife. Not only was this memorable circumstance commemorated in the Church of the Apostles, but it was also celebrated in bas-relief figures on the wall of the burgomaster's residence, the sign of the paroquet in the New Markt. The searcher after antiquities will, however, look in vain for either. They are not now to be found. Modern taste had defaced the porch where stood the one, and erected a shapeless structure on the site of the other. And that is the German folktale, or legend, truly, of the Grey Mare in the Garret. And as I said, this is an amazing story. It's a story of love. It's a story about the plague. But it's also just this wonderful tale about, well, like I said, love. And this tale has many, many versions of it. This one, in fact, we don't know the author, but there's a tale of it covered by the Grimms. There's a number of others. This one, however, is one of my favorites. And one other thing that I truly enjoy is these tales that end with the, if you're going to go looking for it, you're not going to find it. However, in this case, I do believe if you go to Cologne and find the Richmondus house on the Newmarkt, you will find a statue of the Grey Mare. This is Dan Scholes for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Don't forget that if you'd like to help support the podcast, you can head over to patreon.com/folktaleproject, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get early access to every story told. And I'd like to welcome our new patrons, Brian Thomas and Lorraine Crisanto. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening.